Hey folks, Kevin here. Well, it's February 28th, 2018, and this is another episode of Ask Me Anything. Just have one question today. Tim's Homestead, and Tim, is a shout out to you. I saw your video that you did recently. You've got a wet section of property there. It looks like you've got some wetland area. And by all means, make the most out of your wetland areas. I'm planning on doing quite a bit in our wetlands down and back by the ponds in the future. It won't be this year, but at some point in time. And Tim has made the comment, in some of your videos I have seen that you plant through plastic or weed fabric. Was wondering what the name of it is, how long it lasts, where one could purchase it, the pros and cons of using it, and if you have time, maybe you could make a video about it. Thanks. So yes, we've been using the name of the company is DeWitt, and I'll go over the pros and cons with it in just a minute. But we use a whole variety of different weed fabrics or weed barriers, different names that have been used, that were highly recommended by different commercials on TV and in magazines and all. And we're completely sold on the DeWitt brand. There's probably others that are equally as good, but we haven't found them yet. Let me see. I wrote down some things, and I will have links to the weed fabrics that we use on site here, and the garden stakes that must be galvanized. I really recommend using galvanized garden stakes, weed mat stakes, to hold the weed mat down. And there'll be links down below in the description, and I do get an affiliate bonus potentially if you buy stuff, even if you buy other stuff at the same time. It helps us out as YouTube creators, but it doesn't cost you a dime more. So when YouTube creators put links down there, they potentially can get a few cents, for, a penny for a dollar. I'm not sure what it is. It isn't very much, but that actually helps us out as creators. And if you buy a new house at the same time through Amazon or whatever it is, we even get more. You get a cut of not just the things that we do. If it's within a couple of hours of you clicking on the link below, then we get about a little bit of an affiliate, 1% or 2%. I don't know what it is actually. So I'm going to tell you the name of the company first. It's DeWitt. I use their 5-ounce Pro 5 weed barrier fabric. Now this is polypropylene. It's UV treated, so it decreases the chance of UV radiation breaking it down. It's at least two layers. I think it's 3 layers thick. It's hydrophilic, so it will take water and let it absorb through it much more easily. It's UV protected, keeps the sun from breaking it down. It really does last a while. We've been using it we've done it 4 seasons so far, and when we've burnt them as opposed to cutting them, and I'll talk about that in a minute, I think you can probably get a dozen years or potentially more out of it. So I think, is there anything else? A drawback to it, I believe it's made in China, the material. Let me see, is there anything else? And there's a difference if you're going to be putting it down and be a permanent weed barrier for your perennial trees and plants and all. And we do have some out back for our blueberry perennial, and I use the weed fabric a little bit differently there, and I'm still experimenting with perennials and with some annuals like the allium various cultivars, so the onions and the leeks and all. So what are the benefits? Let's just spend a minute talking about the benefits. It saves time. It saves time big time. It's with tarps, with the combination of using tarps and weed fabric together, it saves us at least 75, probably 80% of our time. We used to, at the end of the season, be digging through the weeds to find our produce. and so we're competing. The better that your soil is, the less weed growth you're going to have. But it takes time for that soil to really evolve. Even if you're really proficient at composting, well, your whole soil isn't just the compost. There's all the mineral components that are coming up as well. There's all the weed seeds down in there. There's the different rhizomes that are there. So there's a big dynamic thing that goes on as you're building these garden beds. So a bit of background, we use permanent raised beds that are 30 inches wide with about 18-inch paths in between. So the walkways are about 18 inches wide. I know some people use much narrower walkways. We're older, not as flexible. We bring big bins with us when we set them down in between. And I don't want to make hundreds of paths. You see, I stand up and I push down. With all the greens, like all the kale and the collards and all these great big things, I'm jam-packing it down because it's going over the wash station next, and so on and so forth. But I won't go too far with that. So what are some of the benefits of the all right, so I forgot to finish this. So by using the tarps and the weed fabric together, we use the combination. So in the off seasons, the winter, late fall, winter, and real early spring, the tarps really help us to keep the beds clean, because hopefully you've seen in my tarp video, you see that the snowblower I use, well, that throws little bits of sods and weed right on top of the tarps. Now if the tarps weren't there, it'd be getting into the walkways and into our garden beds there as well. So that helps to protect the area. The tarps also do occulation. That's killing off, starving off the weed seeds as they first germinate when things get warm. It's nice, dark and warm down there, the way weed seeds like to germinate. They come up, they aren't getting the sunlight, and they can't survive. They exhaust their reserves. So those are good for the tarps. What else does the tarp do? Well, it actually helps to protect soil erosion and due to water and to winds. That helps with keeping your soil where it is. Ideally, prepping your beds before you put the tarps on in the fall will give you a perfect transplanting bed for in the springtime. You uncover the crop, you uncover the beds, and they're already dry. They're not soaking wet from all the snow and the rain and all. Now again, in your spot, Tim, you've got a lot of moisture in your area. You're in more of a wetland area. Having pretty good high permanent raised bed going in orientation with the slope of the land, so water tends to run away from it and not have to have the beds that run up against the beds. So, and I believe in the deeper the more raised the raised beds are, for the wetter the soil type you have. Having good soil is also very important. So the tarps help with those things. Then the weed mats, well, they prevent the emergence of all those weeds all around the beds, all around the transplant that you've got in the ground. So what we do every spring is I go through and I broad fork. I aerate the soil with a broad fork. Really goes by pretty darn quickly. I can get all the beds done in a couple of days. Then I run either the tilther, depending on the bed, or the big rotary harrow that goes behind the BCS tractor, and that creates an absolutely perfect bed. Then, if I've already burned holes in the weed mat, the next thing that goes on top of the prepped soil are the drip irrigation. If you're on a steep slope and you're using overhead irrigation sprinklers, I wouldn't recommend using weed fabric, because the water might slide off the surface of the weed fabric before it has a chance to absorb, despite the weed fabric being hydrophilic, wanting to absorb water. But if you're getting decent rains, the water's going to run right off the surface of it if you've got a real steep pitch to your garden beds. That's why it's better to have just a slight slope to the garden beds, and your beds going in orientation. Your beds don't have to be oriented east and west for the southern sun, okay? I see that as one of the common mistakes. Have your beds oriented so it goes down the slope. despite whatever way the sun goes across it, as long as you're not under big shade trees or in a forest area, in the shade. Okay, so once the broad forked is done, they've been tilthed or they've been broad forked. Then we lay down the drip irrigation if there's already holes burned in the fabric, and then lay down the fabric, and you're ready for transplants at that time. Now, we have the luxury of having compost here, so we add compost just about every single season to every single bed. Either I do it in the fall or I do it in the spring. And so that enriches the soil. The broad fork helps to break down the compaction that gradually happens over time when you don't have plants growing through and sending the roots down. Ideally, I wouldn't be using weed mats. I'd be using cover crops, and they would be harvesting carbon, feeding the microbes in the soil, and you don't have to add much compost to it or any compost to it at all. But I'm not at that phase in life yet. The weed fabrics save us tons of time. I think it decreases the pest load. I see the birds come in, the flycatchers will come in, hit some of the when some of the pests, the little larvae emerge from some of like the cabbage moth lays the eggs. The birds don't see those necessarily. Maybe the spiders eat them. But when the little maggots start crawling around, in come the birds. They signal the other birds. They come in. They hit on the weed mat. The birds go after them even quicker. They gobble them all up. 20 minutes to half an hour, 40 minutes later, they're out of there, and there aren't the pests there. Now, I've got to say, a lot of the benefits to the pest reduction is because of all of our hedgerows, all of our niches and habitats that we've constructed, the waterways, the rock beds, all of the things that we put in, all of the beneficial, I'm going to call them companion plants that are in all the margins that bring in all the beneficial insects, bring in all the beneficial amphibians and reptiles as well. So we've got quite a setup here that really has, I think, in addition to the weed mats, helped to decrease our pest burden, but those weed mats knock down our weeds tremendously. So you can use overhead irrigation or submat drip irrigation. Either way, I think works out pretty well. If you're using drip irrigation, the weed mats help to protect those. I think it keeps the soil cooler in the summertime, deeper. It keeps the soil warmer in the springtime when it's real cold. It helps to warm things up. It helps to keep a consistent moisture content below the soil, decreases evaporation, decreases soil erosion through wind or rain events. There's nothing worse than losing all that great compost that you've had. What are the drawbacks? Well, good weed mat is expensive. The benefit of it is it lasts a long time. Another drawback to it is the galvanized stakes, and I'd say don't waste your time with stakes that aren't galvanized unless you can find aluminum ones that are really heavier gauge that can go down through it. So once you put your garden stakes, your little horseshoe staples through the weed fabric, and they're not galvanized and they rust, then you go to try to pull them out later on, you got these big globs of rust and you tear your weed fabric. Now when you tear or cut your weed fabric for your transplant holes, well then they start to fray. So I'd say whenever you cut your weed fabric, don't use a blade, use heat. Use a butane torch. And I'll make videos this spring. I think I created videos last March, April, or May in my garden prep videos. So if you go back to those and see if it's there, I can't remember. I posted so darn many videos. But I showed how I burn all of the holes and how I mark it out. I've got a very long 300-foot tape measure, and I offset some garden plants, depending on what it is and all. If you can, if you're setting up your beds, I really recommend that you have uniform lengths of your beds. I like uniform beds. Our beds, because we adopted what Elliot Coleman, Jean-Martin Fortier, and Curtis Stone have all done. And I'll put links to their books books below as well, which I think are all good books. Now, our goals are different than theirs on our place. We're trying to create the most nutrient-dense food, so we're growing different crops than what they're growing. So with the uniformity of beds, all beds being the same length would be ideal, so that if you got to rotate crops and you want to put your broccoli, which is a different row spacing and all than your cabbage, then or your corn or whatever, you can just rotate the mat to the other row, which they're all 30 foot or 60 foot or 90 foot, whatever the lengths of your beds are. You can use that same mat on multiple beds. The other part of uniformity is having your beds all 30-inch wide. That's how I got started off. 30-inch wide, raised depending on how wet your soil is, raising up even higher and having your paths be lower so they can drain off. Certainly have a nice pitch to those to the paths so that the water can run away. So we use in our beds are 30 inches wide, which works out best if we use a 48-inch wide fabric so that it wraps around the edges, helps to hold the side walls in so the side walls don't fall into the paths. Our paths are wood chipped. In the future, we'll be using either splitting a 48-inch wide down the center and using a 24-inch wide with that extra from each side, because our paths are about 18 inches wide, and we're going to want to have that all covered so you don't have weeds going up in the paths either. So right now we still have enough wood chips that are coming in that I can keep adding wood chips on the top of it. The better the soil is, the easier it is to pull out weeds and all. It's just a pleasure to pull out the weeds. If we've got dandelions, we spot a dandelion, we leave it there and I let it get as mature as possible because I'm trying to propagate as many dandelions as possible. Because all their nutritional benefits as well and medicinal benefits. So having uniform beds and all. So we decrease evaporation, we decrease soil loss, we decrease the time doing weeding, we potentially decrease the amount of pests that are in the bed. All of those things are great benefits. It's more expensive, the staples, because if you're in a windy area, you got to use even more staples. We're in a real windy area, so we use lots of staples. They're expensive as well, and I'll put links to both of those down below. I believe these are made in China, the weed mats. It's kind of a disadvantage. I'd like them to be grown locally. I've been buying some of my tarps from Harbor Freight because they're the cheapest. Now Farmer's Friend sells tarps, now silage tarps that are UV treated. Those are the ones I'm going to go to next. They're in the United States. It just costs so darn much to have it shipped to us, so that's a drawback. But those are all components. This weed fabric is multi-layered, UV treated, helps to retain moisture, warms the beds in the spring, decreases the heat. Now, I should talk about this. When you're doing your transplants, let's say it's getting those hot, blistering hot, sunny days when you're doing your transplants, and we use predominantly at this point drip irrigation below the weed mat. However, if we're doing the transplants, it might behoove us to go ahead and run some overhead sprinklers a couple of times a day when we put those delicate transplants, do the transplants first thing in the morning or last thing at night after the sun is set. Make sure that western sun is just about out of sight, so everything starts cooling off. Hit the sprinklers one time to cool down the mat if they're real hot. Do the transplants and do at least 3, maybe 7 days of overhead additional sprinklers just to cool off the mats so that we're not overstressing and dehydrating those transplants until they have a chance to go in. Some people talk about the transplanting can be a real pain in the butt if you have weed fabric. If you have good size holes, and I think ours are about 2-inch, our holes are, and there's very few weed seeds in it except for what blows in. And again, the weed fabric prevents a lot of those weed seeds from penetrating through the weed fabric because if you have wind in your place, you're going to have weed seeds coming in. If you have birds flying overhead, you're going to have weed seeds coming in. So that's another thing. It helps to prevent those seeds from getting out of control, especially if you don't have much time. Thea works like crazy hours. I'm here, I'm doing other things, building things, doing other work in different locations, different projects. So I don't have time to just go through and do it. Now I've got some weeding tools that I'll do some demonstrations with that I'm finally getting better and better with using different tools, and I can do beds really quickly now. But it's taken me a while to learn what tools, and I've spent money on tools that I no longer use. and I'll do a video about that this spring as well, some of the tools. So the benefits, the drawbacks, let me just see, I took some notes earlier, see if there's anything here. I think the one plant that I would say that we do, it is a challenge, excuse me, are tomato plants. These will grow them 18 to 24, 30 inches tall by the time I get some of them in the ground. And so when I do those transplants, I really want to bury so much of the stem of the plant, and sometimes I lay it a little bit on its side. So that means I got to flip up one side of the weed fabric, know exactly where it's going to emerge through the soil so it goes through the hole, and then I go ahead and I dig it down, put the hole in, and then pull the weed fabric back. That's the only plant that I think it's a real pain in the butt to transplant through the weed fabric. You could use two different pieces of weed fabric and transplant them in, get them all in a nice straight row, and then have the edge just sort of like overlap each other in between the beds, but just abut each other or pinch back a little bit right where the plants are. So you could do that as well. That's what I've done with the blueberry plants out back, and I'll show you how I'm going to do blueberries and those sorts of plants in the future. I learned the hard way in many ways. What's another drawback so like I said, I think you really have to use heat to cut your holes and cut your lengths or any other cuts you have to make in the weed fabric. Use heat. I use a little propane torch. I use two boards side to side if I'm going to make a long cut, and I burn in between. And again, I think there's videos on me doing that already up. One of the drawbacks is when you're burning it, you don't want to be breathing in those fumes because they are toxic. You don't want to be burning polypropylene. And that's, again, a drawback. It's one of those things that I offset. I'm contributing to pollution in that way. I think that covers everything with the weed fabric. I just wanted to mention the tarping with it too, because that combination has really worked out well. I'm doing some solarization as well with using some clear or whitish polytunnel or greenhouse fabric that's used to help solarize, to really burn that top inch of soil and kill the weed seeds as they're germinating that way, in addition to using tarps. We have very big tarps. I'm one guy that's got to move them around in a very windy location, so I don't look forward to it at all. I want to come up with a system. I thought about using roller systems to help me get these things down, something I hook on to the back of Pepe, that little green four-wheeler you see me drive around, so that I can pull that up to the end of a bed, pull it out to a certain point, stake it down, then go back and back Pepe off and get it down. It's just so hard when you're working on windy days. Either video recording, as you know, Tim, or laying down tarps. Both of those are a benefit, or a pain in the butt dealing with tarps. Well, I think I covered everything. I'm not going to read through my whole note list. I'm not that good at it. That's everything that I could think of it. There's so many things I've learned over the years, and again, down below I'll put a link to the weed fabrics that we use, and the garden staples or garden stakes, whatever you want to call them. They're actually U-shaped. They're bent wire, a heavy gauge wire that's galvanized. You want galvanized. And I'll put a link to Jean-Martin Fortier. I think The Market Gardener, his book is outstanding as a reference. It's his years of experience go into that book, and there's tables in it, and he's just a wealth of information. Elliot Coleman has several books, and that's on season extension. I'll put his information down as well. Curtis Stone, he's an urban farmer. So he's in a city in is it Alberta or is it Calgary? I can't remember. He's in Canada, northwestern Canada, and in a high desert area. they do get some snow, but they, when you look at their videos, they've got green before us and they've got green after us here, and they don't get the amount of snow or cloud cover that we've got here. But he's growing for profit. Jean-Martin Fortier is growing for profit. And eventually we want to grow for profit here, but we're growing for nutrients. So we're growing different crops that we think are most beneficial for us. So it's more of the ideals, or the not necessarily a good marketing strategy. Just trying to provide all the nutrients to our bodies to live as long and healthy as possible. So those links will all be below in this video. So I hope this video was helpful. Please give it a thumbs up if you think it was of value. Share it on social media, and leave comments and ask questions. This is a way I learn what I've forgotten already, things that I sort of take for granted and all. And if you want more videos, request videos like this, because as the season comes up, I'm going to try and get my cameras to work. And I've got to come up with a weight station for these tripods because they keep blowing over in the wind. So I got to figure those things out. But if you request certain videos to see certain things, let me know in the future. So without any further ado, have a fantastic day, folks. Bye-bye now.